You can hear Peggy? No one else. This is a private conversation. So how you doing? Good, good. That secret you wanted to share with me? Okay. You did what? How many times? With whom? Oh, my goodness. All right. All right.
Craig, are you ready? What?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Astrology Night here at SoulFood Books. Are we alive tonight? Yes, thank you very much. We are presenting Rick and Jeff, who have been doing this Astrology Night for about 4 or 5 years now, every Wednesday. Thank you for coming. A little SoulFood note, we are having our 6-year anniversary this weekend. So come join us. And let's get this show on the road. Everyone, big round of applause for Rick Levine and Jeff Jower.
Hey. Thank you, Uncle Craig.
And thank you to Soul Food Books for hosting us here every month. And we have a rock and roll month here. We're talking from Redmond, Washington, for those of you who are listening online. And it's the first Wednesday night of every month here. And you want to kick it off?
Yeah, I just want to do our one commercial. For those of you who are finding our northwestern weather a little bit too cool for your liking, Rick and I would like to invite you to join us in tropical Bali, Indonesia, where we will be teaching a seminar, 2 seminars actually, from October 8th to the 18th this year. You can get details on the front page of stariq.com. That's stariq.com. Or get in touch with Rick and me, and we'll tell you more about why we're going back to Bali for the 4th time in the last 7 years.
Has it been that long?
It's that many years.
Wow. So I think you would have had to have been dead or on another planet. What? What? Closer, louder. Oh, no.
Is that a personal request? Okay. Just checking.
So I think you might have had to have been checked out, dead, or on another planet, not to know that there's already been some special astrological or some events in the sky, cosmological events. In 1630, Johannes Kepler, who figured out the laws of planetary motion, figured out that Venus would track across the sun. It happened in 1631, the year after he died. He didn't get to see it, and apparently only 2 people on the planet saw it. Yesterday, there were times at which there were close to 200,000 people on the NASA website watching it simultaneously. Now, this is just the day after a full moon lunar eclipse, and it's extraordinary the amount of public awareness there is about this. Now, whether or not it's important astrologically, we'll delve into a little bit, but that's just the kickoff of a rather extraordinary month.
Yeah, there's a heck of a lot going on right now. And just knowing that there's a lot of planetary activity going on, I think is license to do more, to take risks. There are periods of times when the waves, whether they're personal or collective, are more dynamic. When they are, plan for bigger rides. And this is certainly a month for doing that. Because standing still is probably the most difficult thing to do.
Maybe impossible.
Month. Yeah, this month. We started, as Rick pointed out, with a full moon eclipse and a rather complicated one. When the moon is eclipsed, it usually means let go of the past or let go of an old habit. This lunar eclipse took place in the forward-looking philosophical sign of Sagittarius, which on one level means your belief systems, your big expectations are worth a second look. They're worth reconsidering. And yet, at the same time as the eclipse, Mars, the planet of action, assertion, and aggression, was making challenging right angles to both the sun and the moon, sort of charging us up, motivating us to feel like we better do something. The challenge is we might not know what that is. So this is kind of hamster in a cage kind of energy. which is also a good thing to do when the sun is in Gemini. Well, I got to be busy, right? I got to be busy. I have to do something. And whether that doing something is useful or not is a question that we're going to try to do our best to answer collectively, but you're going to have to figure out for yourselves individually.
Do you remember the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland? Okay, do you know that hatters really went mad because they used Mercury in making the rims of hats? Mercury is the ruling planet of Gemini. Mercury is that part that Jeff was describing, was running around in the hamster wheel. I'm late for a very important date. Everything's happening so quickly, but nothing's happening at all. I'm going around and around and around in circles. Well, we had on the eclipse day, not only the sun in Mercury's key sign, Gemini, but as Jeff said, it was square Mars, but Mars was in Mercury's other key sign, Virgo. So we have this whole mercurial kind of noisiness. And on top of that, of course, Mars is 90 degrees to the sun, square, and to the moon, which is the stress that Jeff was talking about. However, there's another piece of the puzzle, and that was that this was just the day before Venus transited, went across the face of the sun, which means from an astrological point of view, Venus was joining up with the sun on the day of the eclipse. Which means, because the sun was 90 degrees to Mars, so was Venus, exactly. Venus and Mars are the lovers. This is the cosmic, romantic energy. This is them arguing or making love, actively pushing that energy, kind of pushing it back and forth. Can I say that?
Yeah.
I just did.
Well, that's part of it. Mars, the planet of action and passion in Virgo, is about doing things perfectly, doing them just right, following the formula, following the ritual. But Venus in Gemini is about being bored with the old stuff. It's like saying, well, you did this last time, and I loved it. But, you know, it's not that interesting right now. So I think we're having to sort out what rituals and routines, not just in our erotic lives, but in all areas of life, are effective and worthwhile, and which are just repetitions of old patterns which aren't teaching us anything or leading us forward in any kind of meaningful way.
Now, although when we look at an eclipse, we look at the sun and the moon, the full moon opposite the sun, and Venus very close to it, and Mars stressing it. So we look at angles to the sun and the moon during the eclipse. But in this case, we also need to look at Mercury, because the sun is in Mercury sign Gemini, and on the day of the eclipse, Mercury is forming a harmonious trine with stabilizing Saturn, and again we get this Gemini, do it both ways, either way, either or, both and, this Gemini back and forth noisy thing, because on one hand we have the noise of this Mars square kind of bringing up anxiety and anger and aggression and the need to do something and go somewhere and run around in the wheels, the hamster wheels, and on the other hand, stabilizing Saturn is harmonizing with mental Mercury, saying, yes, but there's a seed of something that's worth keeping here, that's important, that really has sustenance or endurance. So again, it's that both sides of the coin are being pulling at us from different directions.
Absolutely, and Saturn in Libra, the sign of the balance of the scale, is also dualistic. Its harmonious relationship with Mercury represents the wisdom of recognizing relationship. That nothing exists by itself, that we can only understand anything in comparison to something else or in the context of something else. So, I'll play Rick's role here, which is sometimes to take a harmonious aspect and describe what the problems are. And the problem of intellectual Mercury in a harmonious alignment with reasonable Saturn is coming up with good bullshit to rationalize things. We can come up with such good, realistic stories to explain things that we miss a lot of other things that may be important but don't fit into the neat pattern that we're trying to work with. These are not neat times. This eclipse was in Sagittarius, as we said. Sagittarius is long-range view, long-range planning. Well, I think all of the astrological activity, or a lot of it this month, is about bringing our focus in closer. That's part of the work of what Gemini is. You know, sometimes you can't figure out what your future is, or where you want to go with it, or what life means. and sometimes you don't have to. There is value at certain points in life to just paying attention to what's in front of you right here and now, blind and meaningless as it might seem, but which will unfold over time to open up meaning later. And I think if you're jumping to get answers now, you're likely to come up with great sounding ones that still may not take you where you want to go.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Jeff, because the planets this month, and we'll drill down on this, over the next half hour or so, the planets are really tempting us to look far out, and yet your prescription is in some ways the opposite. You're saying stay present, because we have several, not just one, not just two, but several events that are really kind of luring us to looking out not only weeks and months ahead, but years ahead, decades ahead even. And so I find it interesting because I hadn't thought about it the way that you said, and I'm kind of half agreeing with you.
Me too.
I'm half agreeing with the other half.
Yeah. The disagreeable half.
Right. But I think, that this eclipse, because Sagittarius pulls us so far into the future, the Sagittarius moon, and there's all this local noise, and Mars in Virgo wants us to focus. I think that idea of even if it's uncomfortable, even if it takes you to places that make you not at ease, that the present moment is where we need to be, although the elephant in the middle of the table is really this guy here that we'll probably get to in a minute, and this is the square between very slow-moving Uranus, an 84-year cycle, and Pluto, which is a 245-year cycle, give or take a year. We haven't been measuring it long enough to really know. We can guess. But these two planets are coming closer throughout the month. It perfects. It comes exact on June 24th. And I'm just setting this out there because, again, the dissonance between we got real shit going on right now, and yet there's stuff that's just kind of luring us off into this future where we think we need to be, but not yet.
Yeah, and the news, the idea that Spain may go into default and all of the economic issues in Europe that may spill over here certainly get us thinking on the larger cataclysmic scale of this Uranus-Pluto square. They're slow-moving planets. They're about larger issues, but we can't necessarily grasp them. And that to a certain extent, again, the best way to manage the future well is to handle the present well. But I want to say a couple of words about Venus's transit over the sun yesterday. Now, Venus and the sun have conjunction. That is, they join together in the zodiac every year. And as Rick pointed out early on, this exact alignment, that is Venus crossing over the face of the sun, is a relatively rare astronomical event. In fact, it is so uncommon that there isn't really a sort of astrological agreement on what it means. So let me make one up or offer
and then let me disagree with him.
All right.
I don't know what you're going to say.
Yeah. What I'm thinking is this. Venus, the planet of love, is retrograde, meaning that the issues of love, values, and self-worth with which Venus is associated are backing up for reconsideration. Venus passed over the sun of will and ego and identity, which on some level means relearning how to love or value ourselves. Sun is self, Venus is love, retrograde is backwards redoing. But here's the twist. This is all happening in Gemini. It's about loving all of the parts of ourselves, not just the good parts, which we tend to do. We get approved for being kind and nice and loving and sweet and intelligent, and we're condemned or self-condemning for being impatient, gruff, rude, selfish, etc., etc. But a fundamental sort of psychotherapeutic idea is to engage all of ourselves, the shadow, the unexplored darkness in ourselves. Gemini, the sign of duality, is about the Jekyll and Hyde, the bad you, the crappy you, as well as the sweet and delicious you. And I think that one possible usable application of this Venus transiting the sun is to love all of the parts of ourselves, especially the undesirable ones. Now, I understand the resistance to loving the undesirable parts of ourselves is that we think in approving or loving that behavior, we're approving it and we're going to perpetuate it. The fact is the opposite is true. When you love the darkness in yourself, it gets integrated into the light, and the wounded, weak, and damaged self finds an appropriate place of balance in the larger, healthier aspects of who we are. And that's one way to look at this.
It's the what you resist will persist.
Exactly.
Not my line. I think Werner Erhard.
Ah. Next.
What'd you say?
Next up, Mercury in Cancer.
Well, yeah, I want to just say a quick word about what you said about the Venus and the Sun and not really knowing. There's a lot of astrologers who have been saying this is the most amazing thing, since white bread or chopped liver or whatever the hell that saying is. And I think that Jeff's comment earlier this evening really sums it up, because even though this is a rare event, the next one doesn't happen for 100 and something years. 105 years, and the previous one didn't happen since, 2004. But that's only 8 years ago. In early June of 2004, this same transit happened. And Jeff pointed out, how many people know what happened the first week of June in 2004? Did it change your life? No, maybe for one or two people you might remember, but the event itself astrologically may not be significant, although astronomically it's significant, and the fact that I believe that whenever you get a lot of people thinking the same thing, that thought becomes more important. And when you have hundreds of thousands or millions of people on the planet consciously thinking about something that's cosmic, in the divine proportion, in the proportion that has to do with Venus, the planet of beauty and love, what's wrong with that? So, now the additional thing I want to say about Mercury, which is about to move into Cancer, Mercury has been in Gemini, its own or home sign, and so with all this other Venus retrograde and the Sun buzzing in Gemini, Mercury has been adding to the mix. But on the day that Mercury shifts into Cancer, the energy changes more significantly than just interplanet changing signs. I mean, Mercury changes signs roughly every 4 weeks, give or take. But what happens is that as Mercury moves into Cancer tomorrow, let me move this back to a day at a time here. Okay. As Mercury moves into Cancer, and you can see it there moving from Gemini to Cancer, what it does is it creates a very fast series of aspects with outer planets that becomes part of a recurring theme over the next weeks ahead. And that series of aspects is that Mercury first harmonizes with dreamy, intuitive Neptune. That would be tomorrow and the next day. But then over the next few days, it very quickly shifts gears and makes that same hard 90-degree angle thing, but this time, unlike Mars's hard angle with the full moon eclipse, this time Mercury is making hard angles with Pluto and Uranus. Remember, those were the two that we said earlier were the elephant, in the center of the table that we can't ignore, but it's almost too big to talk about. Well, when Mercury hits that, we're going to talk about it. So I want to back up to Mercury moving into Cancer, and then we can come and drill on that a little bit more, unless you have anything else you want to say.
No, I want to talk about Mercury in Cancer.
Yeah.
Cancer is a water sign, a feeling sign. It's about nurturance and self-protection. It's about security. Mercury in Cancer is about looking at life, because Mercury is the intellectual lens, through a security-conscious pair of glasses. So the relative detachment we may have to the various crises and issues in the world may begin to heat up when Mercury gets into Cancer. I think what we're getting here is going to be stronger rhetoric about how serious things are. And that can evoke, I think, a lot of fear. We're in a political season in the United States, and what do we deal with? We deal with both hope and fear. Those are the primary products that we're selling. And we may be hearing some calamitous speech or more calamitous speech because Mercury in Cancer says, or is about, I want to see a world that's safe, with safe homes and plenty of food. And we know life isn't safe. None of us gets out of it alive. And because Mercury is coming to trigger this epical transformational pattern of Uranus and Pluto that will be operant through 2015, I think we're going to be hearing some things and perhaps seeing them in our own lives which feel really big. The fact that they feel big or look big doesn't mean that we need to take giant steps towards them. It's like, what does the courageous warrior do in the midst of crisis? Slows down and focuses rather than being caught up in the wave of perception with the chaos going
That's
on
such a
around them.
Cancerian move.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. It's interesting because, and we'll talk more about Cancer in a little bit, because on the summer solstice, the sun moves from Gemini to Cancer, increasing this Cancerian energy, but kind of, foreshadowing Mercury, the planet of intellect, which is ahead of the sun right now, pulling our minds into that place. It's interesting because Mercury is like antenna that reaches out, but it reaches out and it gets information and it goes, whoa, I got to pull back in. This is scary. I need to protect, as Jeff said. I need safety. Remember, Cancer is just Latin for crab. The crab lives in the intertidal zone where the tide goes up and down and up and down every day. The tide is always changing. Therefore, the crab never really gets to be at ease because it's always worried that it's going to be left high and dry or carried off by the tide. And therefore, the crab, which doesn't have a backbone, has created a hard outer shell, an exoskeleton, to protect itself. And so in a way that Mercury becomes the rationalizations and the beliefs and the things that say, oh my God, it's horrible. I'm slowing down and pulling in and I'm going to be safe inside my little shell. And I may even be like the ostrich who puts his head in the sand because I don't want to know about this shit. It's scary. I don't want to worry. I want to go home. Homes, Cancer is about home and family because our homes are like our exoskeleton. Our family structures, everything else changes. But you know that saying, blood is thicker than water? Think crab here, because the safety is as the watery tides are changing, there's something that we have in our life that doesn't change. A friendship, a relationship, a marriage comes and goes, but your brother or your sister is still your brother or your sister. The home becomes a buffer, a place where we're safe inside of our homes. And so the Mercury in Cancer becomes the intellect reaching out into that place and wanting, I think you hit it right on the nail, wanting to feel safe. And yet, these are huge changes that are coming. And therefore, scares the shit out of us.
Well, which isn't necessarily a bad thing depending upon what you do with it. It's never our response that's the issue. It's the judgment that we put on that response and the behavior that follows that response. Being concerned is a reasonable thing. Now, what are we going to do with it? If we withdraw, if we try to return to an imaginary world of pre-existing safety, I think we're in trouble.
You mean the Roosevelt years?
Right. The Teddy Roosevelt years.
Oh, yeah, those.
But if you're willing to use fear or concern to step out of your intellectual box and create and imagine realities that are different that are currently existing, that could perhaps come up with some solutions. Now, we have something else going on that's weird. Mercury is a planet of intellect. Cancer's a water sign. It's not exactly the easiest match in the world. On the other hand, Jupiter is moving on June 11th, Jupiter representing higher mind, belief, and philosophy, on June 11th is moving into Gemini, a sign in which it is traditionally uncomfortable.
Why?
because Jupiter is about a broad brush philosophical view and a statement of meaning. But Gemini is not about meaning. Gemini is about data and facts. So Jupiter in Gemini represents, during this year-long transit, the temptation to conflate data with meaning. Do you ever meet somebody, oh, she or he is really smart, they know this, they know this, they know this, they know this, and they have no sense. They have a lot of data, but they don't have a sense of vision and meaning. And collectively, with Jupiter going into Gemini, the undesirable side is, in our hunger for answers, which is a Jupiterian role, we're going to be grabbing on facts left and right, being all over the spectrum, intellectually, philosophically, and politically. When we have planets that are in signs where they are not at home, where they are not comfortable, it's like a difficult dive. The degree of difficulty is higher. Finding wisdom with Jupiter in Gemini is really difficult because we can clutter the mind with 1,000,001 pieces of data that disperse the inherent intuitive knowing and wisdom that Jupiter represents at its best. But if you make the dive, that is, if you're able to read a wide variety of material or expose yourself to a diverse spectrum of ideas and beliefs and philosophies and not get lost in the trees, then you may find a much richer and more meaningful forest than the one you were in before.
Yeah, I think that was all very well said about Jupiter moving into Gemini. 2 additional points. One is that Jupiter takes 12 years to go around the zodiac, around the sun. You know, the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, even Mars, they're all pretty close to Earth, and we're familiar with them. They feel like we feel at home with them because we have enough of the patterns of them going around and around. But Jupiter spends an entire year in a sign, and it moves at a slow enough pace that it creates some weight. Even though it's expansive, it creates some sustenance in a spot. And I think you're right, Jeff. I think it's hard to hold our attention. Jupiter is slowing us down, or it theoretically slows the rhythm down, so we have a whole year of this Gemini energy, and yet we're all over the place. Our minds are moving back to that hamster in the cage, except now we're looking for meaning everywhere and anywhere, and everything's the next great solution, and all this is going on, and we're collecting this information without necessarily having meaning. But Mercury in Cancer is its own form of collector, because Cancer is a receptive sign. Cancer is like it's connected with the moon, which holds the light. It receives feelings and receives emotions. And so Mercury in Cancer is really good at listening and not saying anything. And that Jupiter and Gemini is all over the map, and the two of these, I think, means that there's a lot going on, but we don't exactly know where to go with it or what to do with it.
Yeah, and I think we need to be discriminating in who we ask for answers. Many of us in this room are probably spiritual or metaphysical seekers, and who own or have read dozens, if not 100 books, any one of which perhaps could radically change our lives for the better. And yet, because we have 100 books, we can't live up to any one of them. That's like Jupiter in Gemini. It's like having a library of so many books of philosophy and metaphysics that you're buried under them, and you can't find the simplicity of your own wisdom. Maybe some of that wisdom of Jupiter in Gemini on the higher side is that truth is not absolute. Because Gemini flickers and changes. It moves like a butterfly. And if there is value in Jupiter in Gemini, it's understanding conditional truth. This is true for now, for this moment, with this person, in this situation, and will shift in another situation with another person. The downside, of course, is a lack of ethics. The high side is, and here's a good exercise, listen to the people that you think are full of crap, politically, philosophically, morally, and you will find something of truth and interest there. And the benefit of doing that, as long as you don't buy into all of their stuff, is that the boundaries and the barriers between my truth and your truth can be diminished. And maybe some dialogue, if we don't have to be absolutely right or absolutely wrong, and we run in a political system and we run in a competitive economic system in which we think of winners and losers and right or wrong. But what Jupiter and Gemini offers, aside from the sleazy car salesman bullshit lying that we will get out of this on the dark side, is relativizing the absoluteness of truth, which could open up dialogue, could open up minds. The real school of Jupiter and Gemini is not reinforcing what you already know, but adding the odd element that doesn't fit into your existing philosophical system, mutating, transmuting the mind, and opening it up, perhaps temporarily leaving you in a state of confusion, but ultimately making connection of one mind with another more possible.
Now remember, Jupiter's move into Gemini on June 11th is just the day that we walk into the new room. It stays there for the entire year. I think it doesn't change signs again until the following late June.
Something, who cares?
Yeah, it's too far out. Remember,
Yeah,
we're
we don't
focusing on the present moment.
That's right.
But the thing here is, Jeff, I think normally when an outer planet changes signs, especially Jupiter or Saturn that move fast enough, we can sometimes get a buzz when they do. I don't think we'll have a clue on the day that Jupiter moves from Gemini into Cancer, because on that exact same day, Mercury becomes the first planet to make an aspect with Pluto, the Darth Vader. Think the Dark Lord, the planet that rules the Hell realms. Mercury opposes Pluto and squares Uranus, the revolutionary planet, lightning striking, sudden change, topsy-turvy, upside down and backwards. Mercury becomes the first planet to make an aspect with both of them that are so close that it happens on the same day. Right. Mercury opposes Pluto and squares Uranus within 24 hours. Uranus squares Pluto exactly on June 24th, but they're already within a degree, within 3/4 of a degree of being exact themselves. And so even though they're not exact for another couple of weeks, or for another couple of weeks, I think that on that day we get the total buzz of that energy. And maybe you want to say more about Mercury opposed Pluto and square Uranus, and if not, I will.
Well, we can both. Mercury-Uranus can be inventive and intellectual breakthroughs, but also intellectual panic. And Mercury's opposition to Pluto can be deep, profound conversations, and also sensitivity to manipulation in conversation.
Or manipulating itself.
Right. I say don't trust your mind. Have a sense of humor. That's the positive side of Gemini, is that whatever you're doing, however deep it is, that you have a place where you can step out of yourself a little bit to go, is it really that serious? That I think the fail-safe position or the safety zone is not withdrawal, but it's a slight separation from whatever it is you're in the middle of. I mean, a sort of ordinary interpretation of this is terrible. Manipulation and panic and power systems breaking down and all sorts of stories that we don't need to promote. So a sense of humor, which isn't about not taking ourselves seriously, it's taking ourselves just slightly less seriously, I think is a reasonable buffer. It's the wisdom of Jupiter and Gemini. Whatever you think is true, there is another perspective to it. Rick, you had something you want to add about that?
Well, not until you asked me. But thanks.
It's too late. All right, next item.
You know what I was thinking, Jeff, is that just like during the full moon eclipse when Mars was squaring the eclipse, and we had a nice trine from Saturn to Mercury that gave us some stability, we now have Mercury kind of creating this very uncomfortable and dynamic square, and yet the Sun is coming into a trine with Saturn. It's exact the next day. And so once again, we're kind of all over the map where we may be totally freaked out by what's happening. There may be some political news, around the 10th, 11th, and 12th. Not that there isn't every day. I mean, I get that. But there's also this ability in here to go to that place where we can stand, even if we're stepping outside of it. We know that that's where we're standing, and that's where we're stepping outside of in order to get that perspective.
Absolutely. And a positive side of this is technological breakthroughs on a collective level. I mean, we have a lot of
Is there a new iPad coming out?
We have a lot of serious environmental issues, energy issues, and yet there's an enormous amount of intellectual resources being brought to bear, and that would be a positive side. This Mercury-Pluto opposition can represent a situation about which your thoughts are so dark and fearful that it forces you to see things from another angle, which can suddenly free you from the very dilemma that you thought was going to take you down.
And I think the suddenly thing becomes even more so because Uranus is playing in here. I mean, oppositions are like tug of wars. Whether it's an eclipse of the full moon opposite in Gemini, or the full moon in Sagittarius opposite the moon in Gemini, there's a tug of war going on that Jeff described earlier as the tug of war between the distant future and what's going on now. Here we have a tug of war between Mercury, who's the informationaholic of the planets. Mercury was who the gods sent into the underworld to rescue Persephone from Hades, from Pluto, who was abducted. Mercury can cross into the hell realms unscathed. And here's the power and the beauty and the opportunity of this transit. And that is that even though we can't go into the hell realms, into the dream time, without losing awareness of the daytime, and we can't wake up without remembering everything that's in the subconscious or in the dream time, our words, our communication, our free association, the communication can. And so we send Mercury into the underworld to bring back the treasures. But with the Uranus square, he doesn't bring back, or it, because Mercury is androgynous, it's a he-she. Mercury doesn't bring back what we expect. We send Mercury on a mission to go into the underworld to get something, and he comes back with something totally different. Kapow, sudden awareness change, and we have to deal with it.
Yeah, I think that's great, Rick. And it suggests that, again, if you're willing to look at your fear or your darkness from a place and not fall into it, what you can get is an extraordinary amount of information, or a quality of information that may free you from the very fear that brought you to the situation.
And I think we have fear coming into that because, just the day before. But we also we skipped over, and in a normal month, this might be the main event of the month, but this month is so huge with the big events that the sun squared Mars just a couple days before this. And so Mars is the planet of war, of anger, and the sun square Mars, we can heat things up hotter than they need to be. So we come into this transit kind of like already with a bit of like trigger happy angst, ready to be angry at the wrong target or the wrong person, over the wrong issue even.
Right. And it's amazing, again, how powerful it is to allow ourselves to think badly, speak badly, and behave badly without overreacting to it. That thing that you say to somebody that causes an explosion and you feel may damage and perhaps destroy your relationship with them could be the very thing that saves it, saves them, saves you. Don't lose touch with your intention. Don't let the circumstances confuse you with what you're really about.
New moon?
New moon.
New moon, I
Saw you standing alone. On June 19th, we have a new moon in Gemini. Gemini tends to overload us with information. New moons are hopeful and stupid.
Although people laugh at it.
Or they laugh at new moons.
The Gemini energy.
Not just because it's Gemini, because it's a new moon. And as I say here, almost every month, the new moon is the beginning of a cycle. And at the beginning of a cycle, we're naive. We don't have experience necessarily within that cycle. Now, there's some compensation here with Saturn trying the moon. But what it is about, I think, this new moon is not making a definitive choice. It may be setting up some options. In other words, instead of saying, we're going to go here in the fall, or I'm going to make this plan in my work, a good Gemini new moon would be the opportunity to say, I'm going to possibly do this or possibly do that, and think them through so that you have two choices to call upon in terms of behavioral response depending upon how the circumstances go.
I think another consideration here is that this new moon, astrologers use the word void of course, which means that in the course of the movement of the moon, until it changes signs, it doesn't make any other aspects. This new moon is at 28 degrees. This is just an hour after the new moon. This new moon is at 28, 29 degrees of Gemini, which means just a couple of hours after the moon moves into Cancer. And the energy kind of shifts a little bit. And so there's something here about, even though the new moon is a beginning, it's like it doesn't last very long. The energy of the new moon shifts pretty quickly, not only with the moon moving into Cancer, but with the sun moving into Cancer the following day.
Right. Well, maybe what that means, that void of course thing, could mean that you learn more when you're off course than when you're on course. That when you were going for this activity, this job, this whatever, and you got lost along the way, you may actually wind up in a place that's a bit more interesting. And because Mars, aggressive Mars, is at a right angle with the new moon, that which starts out with a strong, passionate energy or even anger can resolve itself or lead us to something that's really worthwhile. Don't forget, sometimes we get more out of bad behavior or frustration than we do out of a calm and reasonable and rational way to go. So what this also mentions is there's an extraordinary harvest of energy and of information that's available to us if we don't grasp for it. There's a book out now by Jonah Lehrer called Imagine, and it's about current brain research and pointing out that when we try to solve a problem with a focused mind, we're working left brain, and we're very much narrowing the potential of connections that the mind can make. But when we have a glass of wine, smoke a joint, walk down the road, and listen to music, we go into the right brain, which is less organized, but which then allows us to connect elements that we weren't aware of otherwise. And I think what Gemini, dualistic Gemini, always suggests there's more than one way to go. So if you have the problem, maybe you focus on it. And maybe you just back away and actually getting up from your desk, your chair, and walking around the block and thinking about anything but your issue. There is an actual physiological benefit in doing that, because getting off of the narrow focus of the left brain allows the right brain connections to be discovered. But those connections can't be grabbed. They're like falling asleep. You can't make them happen. You have to let go to allow them to happen. And I think, Rick, a potentially void, of course, Gemini new moon has that sort of quality of learning without aiming.
It's the allowing for serendipity.
Exactly.
You know, the thing that, the greatest thing that might happen in any given moment might be not the thing that you thought was going to happen. Right. And that's doubled down by the whole Uranus and Uranus-Pluto, Uranus the planet of lightning. You know, when lightning strikes, Uranus is said to be the planet of awareness. It's sometimes referred to by astrologers as Uranus the Awakener. Because when lightning strikes, even in the darkest night, in the middle of a storm, at that one moment it strikes, you can see everything. You can see the mountains, you can see the house across the... It doesn't matter how bleak it is, for that moment you have total awareness. And then in the next moment you don't, but you know what?
You saw it.
You saw it and you remember it. And so that's what this is about in some ways. And I think it's also so significant that on the solstice this year, as the sun moves into the sign of Cancer, it retraces the steps of Mercury, which did on the 14th through whatever.
The 11th.
Yeah, the 11th through the 14th. As Mercury moved into Cancer, remember, it first harmonized or trined with dreamy, imaginative, intuitive Neptune, and then it opposed Pluto and Uranus. And now the Sun, as it moves into Cancer, immediately picks up on that harmonizing trine with Neptune. Ah, wonderful, dreamy, somnambulistic, sleepy. But what happens is, because the Sun, from Earth's point of view, moves slower than Mercury, what happens is it takes another week for it to get to the opposition and the square to Uranus and Pluto, and by then they're already exact. And that's and this is really, I think, the key event of the month, even though there's other big things that are woven in and around this.
Yeah, absolutely. The Uranus-Pluto square is, from an astrological perspective, the most important cycle. The Venus transit may be rarer, but again, we don't have much of a place in the language of astrology for developing our understanding of it. Uranus and Pluto square, which is exact on the 24th, is the second stage of what we started in the 1960s when Uranus and Pluto were together. And I think what happened in the 60s in some way, the word that kept coming to mind for me here with Uranus and Pluto was mulching. Taking things and throwing them into this kind of blender, this mixing, this torrent of tormented emotion and chaotic thoughts and mixed ideas and feelings, which, while we're in it, can seem extraordinarily destructive, but may be the necessary phase of what we need to do to extract the essence of the innovation and breakthrough in the cultural transformation that Uranus-Pluto offer.
Yeah, in the first of three exact conjunctions of Uranus and Pluto occurred in the fall of 1965, and they occurred from the fall of 1965 through the summer of 1966. But the cultural, political, economic ramifications of that began several years prior and lasted well into the early 70s. And you see, astrologically, when any pair of planets lines up, it's kind of like a new moon, because that's when the sun and the moon line up. And so that's the seed, that's the beginning. Then, a week after the new moon, or in this case, 50 years, after the exact conjunction. Hold on, we'll get back here in a second. There we go. Nope. Where'd it go? Somewhere here. We'll get there. But so what happens is, now as they're realigning, there's this sense of, that's me. Get that out of there. Don't want that. Sorry. We'll get here in just a second. As they're realigning now, or as they're reaching their square, what's happening is that there's an opening, kind of like an opportunity at which the things that began back in the 60s either will work out and have meaning and have existence and sustenance and endure, or they'll go away. Because the opening square, that 90-degree angle between Uranus and Pluto, represents a test to see if it's going to make it, and it's a crisis. And this is what culturally we're going to be experiencing. It began last year when Uranus first moved into Aries, the day of the Fukushima earthquake, meltdown, etc., through the Arab Spring, through the Occupy everything. And you can bet your bottom dollar, I'll say this now, that through the end of this month, that we will see all of those things that began last year and last summer, they'll come back into the news even more. None of those things are over. They've just gone into latency. They've gone into a period where it looks like maybe they've eased off a bit, and we've seen the tip of the iceberg. And I think that as this month progresses, these issues, certainly some of it will be tied to the economic situation. Certainly some of it will be tied to the bizarre presidential election that we have going, and I'm sure other things.
Yeah, I think a big difference between the 60s, where Uranus and Pluto joined in Virgo, which is the sign of every man, of every woman, the common person. The square is in the most cardinal of signs. That is Aries and Capricorn, the two season-starting signs, which are the most directive and directed, as opposed to Cancer and Libra, which are season-starting, but they're more about assimilation, one with the past and one with others. And what this means to me is this. While a kumbaya spirit we're all in this together, we're brothers and sisters, may be a desirable underlying spiritual tonality. I think moving with the mob will not fix anything. That this is really about the exceptional individual and the exceptional individuality within each one of us. I think that's part of Uranus, the planet of uniqueness, and Aries, the sign of the individual. And it's about Pluto, the planet of power in the hierarchical sign of Capricorn, which says, I don't need somebody else's permission to transform my life or to think about changing my world. The responsibility and the potential falls upon each one of us. And if we all take that, instead of waiting for leaders to emerge or to follow leaders, each one of us then becomes a direct connection with the powerful transformational energy of this. There is genius in all of us, and that if we slow down to make sure that everybody gets it, or that you get the agreement of your family, your clan, your tribe, your coffee shop to go along with you, then I think we're going to bog down into sort of this mediocrity of consensus. It doesn't mean that we're going solo, but any pioneer has to separate herself from the pack, has to be willing to walk alone for a while. And I think some of that spirit can be what can lead to the cultural and the collective breakthroughs that will take us to the next level of human experience.
Can we get an amen?
Amen,
We
brother.
don't want no frickin' amens. You're all on your own.
So,
Hey, woman.
Yeah.
all right. Here's another.
Trying to organize my chaos.
So into this end of the month that we have the sun having moved into Cancer, and by the end of the month we have Uranus exactly on the 24th, exactly squaring Pluto. The following day, as the sun is still moving toward its opposition to Pluto and square to Uranus by the end of the month, the day after slow-moving Uranus squares slowest-moving Pluto, the day after, we have Jupiter. Remember, Jupiter just moved into Gemini on its 12-year run around the sun, or its saunter around the sun. Jupiter in Gemini forms a square with Neptune, which has recently moved into Pisces. And I think here we actually stand in the goddamn kumbaya circle.
Oh, we do, but it's a bullshit kumbaya circle. Well, no, it's very
Bullshit
easy. I'm a fan of the TV show Mad Men, and one of the characters did LSD, and he became spiritual. And then in the last episode, he was acting like the a-hole he really is. And they said, well, what about your enlightenment? He said, well, I got over that. And that's what happens. We can go in the room and hold hands and sing Kumbaya or praise Jesus or Buddha or Allah or Yahweh or whomever, and then go back out and be the ordinary people that we really are. And false prophets will shout
Exactly.
loudly with a Jupiter-Neptune square.
Some of them in political office even.
Absolutely. And it can be that religiosity that's meant to escape individual responsibility and consciousness in the hope that we will all get it. And while there may be moments, and will be moments, of individual illumination on the broadest scale, this one is much more about false prophets than real ones.
Yeah, and I think what it does, Jeff, I think you're right. I think there really is. I mean, both Jupiter and Neptune are both expansive. They're both connected with Pisces, the planet of illusion, religion, spirituality, delusion, and alcohol. And so there is this thing of delusion here, because this is a square. But remember, the sun, which is forming this hard aspect with both Uranus and Pluto during this time, is also harmonizing with Neptune for a few days going into it. So we may get our hopes pumped up by some either religious or political
plan
or something. We have a way. We finally figured out how we're going to make it all work. And the balloon gets blown up too far. And because Jupiter likes doing that. Jupiter is like boom. It pops the balloon. And I think that by the end of the month, when the sun makes its exact opposition to the, we changed signs there, sorry about that. When it makes its exact opposition to both Pluto and to Uranus, which is
The 29th.
on the 29th, and it hits both of them the same day because Pluto and Uranus now are like within a quarter of a degree. They're exact. Now remember this Pluto-Uranus square, which is exact on June 24th, because the Earth's orbit is inside these very slow-moving planets. It looks like Jupiter, it looks like Uranus and Pluto are square, at a square, in, out, in, because the Earth is changing perspective. And the exact Uranus-Pluto square occurs 7 times between June 24th of this year and March of 2015. So we're not talking here about one set of dates that all of a sudden something's going to happen and it's going to be done. Right. This is something that has time to settle in, to morph, to change into something else. Now the other side is winning. Now there's a new side. Now we have a whole different perspective. And in other words, this is a process. And I don't think anyone who tells you that they know where we're going to be in 3 or 4 years on the other side of this process is bullshitting. Walk away from them politely. You know, it's like put your hands in the air and walk slowly away from the car, back away. That's what you need to do because no one knows. You can't know. This is too large of an event, and it's not just June 24th. June 24th is simply an opening. It's an opening call. And by September, when the second one happens, still prior to the presidential election, things will be different. That do-do-do-do will be a different sound.
Yeah, good. And I think about coming back, just one more thought on the Jupiter-Neptune. If someone has the truth, or if someone promises answers, tune into yourself and see if you can find those same answers in yourself. Not as a socialized resonance with an external source, but with an intrinsic connection to something that's true in the body of humanity itself. If you don't have the signal in you, then it's something that you want to at least temporarily keep at arm's length. On the 27th, Venus, the planet of love, which has been retrograde since May 15th, turns around, begins to move forward, and pleasures, artistic things, and relationship issues that may have been gone back in recursive patterns may begin finally to move forward again, although there will be further complications with Venus when she enters Cancer next month.
You know, Jeff, it's interesting. On any other month, just talking about Venus retrograde,
we almost left it out.
Might have been like the whole evening, because it's such. I mean, it happens every year and a half, roughly. I mean, in that range, and yet we didn't even get to poor Venus. Yeah, we mentioned her transit over the sun. We talked a little bit about it in the opening, but this is such a huge month on large scale things. I think, again, coming back to Jeff's opening tidbit of wisdom, we can get so lost in the fear and or the excitement, in the anticipation or the resistance to these big changes, that we can forget about taking care of what's right in front of our noses, what's on our plate, what we're doing for dinner, whatever it is that's in our lives right now. Keep bringing it back to now. Keep bringing it back to now.
That's great, because that is not a denial or an abrogation of responsibility regarding these larger issues. It is a refinement of yourself. It is the excellence that you have in the smaller things in life that line up the distorted, broken, wounded pieces of ourselves to unleash higher levels of awareness.
And I just want to add one other thing to something you said, which I think is also key here. And I want to just reference Jeff's website for many years was asabove-so-below.com. And the As Above, So Below is part of Hermes Trismegistus's what's called the Emerald Tablets. It's the basis of astrology and the basis of the whole idea of projection in psychodynamic psychology. And this whole thing that we're talking about here that's out there, that's cultural, that's social, that's political, that's economic, is all about what's going on in here. I think you nailed it perfectly. If you don't feel it, if it doesn't resonate on the inside, you're not going to notice it on the outside. So the real work to do isn't about changing the government or the banking structure. Not that that's not important. But the real work is about changing ourselves. The real work here is to keep bringing things back and to realize that we are standing somehow in the middle of some crazy harmonic buzz where what's within us and what's out there in the cosmos are the same thing and are represented by how we live our lives. And so the answer is not in trying to control the motion of either a government, a war, or a planet. but to control and to understand and to transform the motions of our own beings.
Well spoken. Thank you, Rick. We are going to take a break. If you would like Rick and me to look at your individual charts, we do a lottery. We pick 3 people, put your first name, your time, date, and place of birth on a little piece of paper, drop it on the table here behind our wonderful videographer,
Or a
Julie.
$20 bill.
Or whatever. And we will reconvene here in about 15 minutes to look at that.
And remember that this is your community place. Jeff and I do this out of goodwill and because we like
We
this
get free
place.
coffee.
But if you like and enjoy these kinds of events, patronize Soul Foods. I mean, buy your gifts here, look around, get a book, get something to drink. Thanks to Lily and Craig who are baristering. And as Craig mentioned, the 6th anniversary party is on Friday night. Please come to that. And I think this is not a lottery because we only select 3. I think it's a littlery.
All right. See you in 15.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right. Craig, John, someone can turn the mics off so we don't have an embarrassing moment.
Or any more embarrassing moments. Thank you. The human tripod. Yeah, I mean, we were serious. Right. And I was aware that
just like a child. Well, I feel just like a child. From my womb to my tomb, I guess I'll always be a child now. Well, some people try and treat me like a man. Yeah, some people try and treat me like a man. Well, I guess they just don't understand. Yeah, some people try and treat me like a man. They think I know shit, but that's just it. I'm a child. Well, I need you to tell me what to wear. primo colorado con barba camburada y llena de ballena inclinándose al sol. De un rayo de luz roja besando nuestra boca, el beso que te sopla, huele a alcohol. Tus tres ojos lunares extraterrestriales entran cuando sales, por eso no se ve nada de tu barba colorada, traviesa y rebelde. Me afecto con espada, pero devuelve con si la noche te persigue, entrégate a ella o dile que tienes dolor de cabeza. Sobrita de reflejo, dame algo tierno, me como tu amor y cago el infierno. Adiós, 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 perno, perno, verne, 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 oh, oh, verne, verne, oh, oh. La, 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 ay, tus ojos colorados, azul y anaranjados, amarillo y verde y marrón. Mi amor envuelto en tu corazón, no lo sueltes por favor. Somos elefantes, serpientes semejantes, tomando aguardiente en el sol, en el sol, en el sol, en el sol.
Lily on the board.
Lily, 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 the lovely Lily. All right,
We're ready.
We're ready. Okay, everyone, shut the hell up.
And he's the good cop. What we're going to do now is look at 3 charts, and as we say every month, for those of you who are newcomers here, this is not meant to be personal counseling or an in-depth astrological analysis. It's just a little demo of the difference between the general cosmic collective weather that we talked about for much of the evening with individual astrology. So it's a demo, and as Rick often points out, we're really using your chart, those of you who are selected, to demonstrate real astrology. And if we humiliate you, don't take it personally. We humiliate ourselves here frequently enough and have become inured to that. Okay.
I'm not sure why this isn't doing this yet, but tell a joke.
Tell a joke. Oh, God. I can't do that. I don't know jokes. I can only be
So
funny
this guy
in
walks
an
into a
unprepared
bar.
way. There you go.
Oh, there we go.
All right.
But now I don't have it here. That's okay. I'll let it. Hello.
Really?
Oh, that's weird.
Is Dina in the house? Are you Dina? You're Dina.
No,
Okay.
that's the Alta Dina.
There are
Okay, we're still having like hold on.
technical trouble.
Let's try this again.
Dina, do you usually cause disruption
I think
wherever you
that's
go?
Dina.
Oh, a different? Are you a DENA or are you a DENA? Could be either one of you.
Or a DNA.
Or a DENA.
All right, just hold on.
There are astrologers in the house making notes, corrective notes. We get reported back. There is a centralized astrology authority and officials of the Washington State Astrological Association, which, by the way, meets tomorrow night. No, I'm sorry, next Thursday night, 7.
Did you?
Yeah, does somebody want to give me the details or do a commercial? Stephanie Galing, a wonderful local astrologer.
And president or immediate?
Co-president or?
You president or immediate past president?
I am president and past president next Thursday.
Okay.
That's what I thought.
So as I said, the Washington State Astrology Association meets the second Thursday of every month, except for July and August. We all take the summer off. We meet at the Puget Sound Yacht Club. Next, we have speakers that come into town, do lectures and workshops. Really, really amazing people who come in. And then next week, we're actually doing a community presentation where 4 different local astrologers are doing their talks. To find out more, go to washingtonastrologers.org or come talk to me and I'll write all the information down for you.
And you don't need to wear a blazer to go to the Puget Sound Yacht Club.
It's not really.
No, it's,
Not a yacht, in the yacht.
yeah, it's on Lake Union
And-
next to a
And
dump site.
the Washington State Astrology Association is one of the oldest statewide astrology associations in the country. It's in its about 36th or 37th year, closer to 40. Yeah,
Wow.
I was president of the organization in 1992, 3, and 4. And it had been around forever when I was president. It's a monthly meeting, kind of like this, a little bit more formal, but presentations from astrologers by astrologers who are both local and nationally and internationally
Yeah.
known.
Worth checking into.
Yes. All right, now I think we're back
All right.
amongst the running, and
Dina.
August
Leah-
5th, 1965.
Okay, sorry, Dina.
Next
Maybe
month,
next
Dina.
month.
Where's the other Dina?
Oh, I just had mine done. I'm good.
Oh.
You just think I was crazy. So.
The first thing that we notice when looking at this chart is that most of the planets, and you don't have to know what they are if your newbies are in the top half of the chart, that is literally
I feel like
the
Vanna
area.
White.
Thank you, Vanna. Literally the area above the horizon. Planets above the horizon generally represent cues and clues of identity and life that come from the outside. The advantage of that, in general, is being more tuned into the world. The disadvantage of that is being less tuned into oneself.
Yeah, this is actually the interesting thing, the intriguing thing to me about this chart is that, as you said, there are so many planets above the horizon. The sun is in fiery, blazing, look at me and love me and appreciate me, and I will love you and appreciate you and look at you back. That's what the sun does. Leo, the moon is in fiery, expansive, optimistic, adventurous, fun-loving Sagittarius. There's a Sagittarius rising. So we have a triple fire action going here. Sun, Leo, Moon, Sagittarius, Sagittarius rising, with all these planets here. Mars at the top of the chart, but the one planet, okay, there's Chiron. We're going to hold that off for a moment, or maybe forever right now. But at the bottom of the chart is Saturn, which is an incredible anchor. I mean, and it's not necessarily visible, but Dina can look like she's playing and having fun and may be, but there's always a more serious agenda. There's something that anchors her, that gives her the discipline, that makes it real, and that Saturn is exactly or very closely opposite this rather stunning. We talked earlier about the Uranus-Pluto conjunction in October of 1965 earlier. Well, this is in August, just a couple of months prior to that. This is the Uranus-Pluto conjunction with Venus, the planet of love and attraction and desire and beauty, right smack dab in the middle, all opposite Saturn.
Yeah, that makes for a complicated relationship life. When you have all the fire in your chart that you do, Dina, that can often be about a kind of dynamism and enthusiasm for life. And yet, love and approval and relationships are much more complex. Venus is the planet of love. You have Venus in Virgo, which often underestimates one's attractiveness, beauty, and self-worth. And they're joined with Uranus and Pluto and oppose Saturn. It's like, oh my gosh, sort of satisfying somebody else. And then when you do, maybe you get dissatisfied with them. And I think that part of the meaning of this, to put it in a positive context, is to be able to experiment in relationship. That relationship, and I think this is true for all of us to some degree, but perhaps more so for you, Dina, than for the average person, relationship is sort of like putting things in a big mix master to see what comes out on the other side. That it's almost as like you're an alchemist or an experimenter in the world of love and relationship. Getting the person who can't stand you to love you is so interesting. Getting the person who doesn't think much of him or herself to love him or herself is amazing. And you know, there's this incredible dynamic about the impact that you have on other people. And that relationship, again, is not necessarily a place of rest, which doesn't mean you can't be happy in it, but it is really a place of movement and almost ongoing discovery.
Well, and ongoing, bumping into, oppositions are often about relationships. So there's this sense of relationships, I think it was Ram Dass who once called relationships the yoga of the West. And there's this sense here of the discipline and the practice, you know, and the bumping into, if a hardship or an obstacle isn't there, you'll pull one in to better the asana or the posture. There's that sense of needing to have the grist, again, Ram Dass, the grist for the mill. But you know, that Saturn is harmoniously trying to Neptune. This becomes a predominant aspect through late this year and on into 2013. So I think that'll help you hum and buzz a little bit. But there's always the sense of what the hell's going on. You know, Neptune squaring the Sun, strong dynamic. You know, and another thing is another optimism. Jupiter return coming up this year for you as Jupiter moves into Gemini. But Jupiter harmonized with Mars. Again, another uplifting, optimistic, you know, see the big picture energy, the Sagittarius moon, Sagittarius rising, the Leo. And yet there's this little stinker of this Mercury retrograde that was into Virgo and then pulled back into Leo. And it's, I think in some ways, it makes that fiery, outgoing energy always something that you're reconsidering, reevaluating. What's the message that I'm giving out? Who am I pulling in? And why, and what happens when I pull in someone who's attracted to all this fiery energy, but there's a bit more seriousness here that might not be what they thought they were getting into. Not that it isn't a good thing, it's just that this one part of you pulls the energy in and then another part of you runs into that dynamic.
Yeah, I think there's some potential here to just go, this is all too complicated. Let me just run. Let me just get away from it. Let me not deal with the issue. But guess what? Part of your gift is to be complicated. You do not have to be consistent to be worthy of love. It's not about you necessarily understanding other people and their complexities. I think it is for you to bring the gift of your own complexity and diversity to others in relationship. Sharing that with them might not make things peaceful and calm, but it makes you damn interesting. And accepting that, I think, is a good and healthy and positive thing for you. So, you know, when I think of that Mercury retrograde at 29 Leo, it's like being a musician who's got the little earpiece in, you know, to hear themselves, and it's turned up too loud. It's so loud in your ear, the feedback that you get in terms of who you are, what are they thinking, is it good enough? I think you could turn that down a little bit, worry less about that, and just enjoy the fact that as a teacher of other people, the confusion and the inconsistency that you bring may actually teach even more than being sane, clear, reliable, or always in the same mood. Okay? Do you have something to say?
Yes, what's going on now, I think,
Yeah.
is very significant because Saturn, Saturn moved toward the end of Libra, and then it retrograded. Remember, we don't know if we mentioned this or not
It turns
earlier,
direct this
but
month.
but Saturn turns direct at the end of June at 22 degrees of Libra, which is within a degree of your Mars. And Mars is hot and energetic, and Saturn is difficult and restraining. It's frustrating, hot, cold, gas, brake, yes, no. And as Saturn, I think as long as Saturn is moving back right now toward Mars, which it does until the end of the month, then by the end of this month and then in July, it begins to separate from that Mars. I think that you'll feel a lot better if you haven't been feeling well, or if there have been difficulties or situations that have been either restraining or disappointing. I think that as Saturn in July and August moves away, it then begins to pick up that trine on Jupiter, and I think things will lighten up a little bit.
Yeah,
or a
tell
lot.
people, and it's about telling other people what you want and what you need from them in getting their cooperation. Those who are unwilling or cooperate, particularly professionally with this at the top of your chart, you can do enormous things strategically and professionally now
Yes.
if you know how to use other people's energy enough.
And it's also about, I think also when Saturn reaches the top of the chart, if you look at what was going on in your life when Saturn was at the bottom of your chart, 95, 96, I may be off a year, but pretty close to that. Saturn was in Aries, 95, 96, 97 even. It's almost like there were things in your life that you started then that have now come to the end of the road. Some philosophical point of view or career venture or whatever. And it's no longer, this is the difficult transit of some of the frustration. It's no longer about climbing on the ladder that you've been on to get higher. You've attained whatever the height is you are. It's now about consolidating and making yourself stable where you are. Because I think that over the next handful of years, it's about creating stability so that in 6, 7, 8 years when Saturn goes over your ascendant, you actually get a blast of a new beginning. So rather than trying to get further along the path that you've been on, it's almost like acknowledging that path may have come to an end, but it's not time to change paths yet.
Yeah,
You still
master
gotta-
what you have.
Exactly.
Run what you have really well. And manipulate others as necessary. It's necessary at times.
Make sense a little bit?
Thank you, Dina.
Yeah, thanks for sharing yourself. Yeah. Good. Where'd it go? There we go. And Ryan.
Is Ryan in the house?
Is there a Ryan in the house?
Oh, hi, Ryan. How are you?
Ryan came all the way from Georgia to be with us tonight.
Oh, really? Thank you, Ryan, for being here. And look at this.
Actually came all the way from West Berlin to be with us.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. What's interesting here, of course, at first,
The flip.
yeah, most everything is in the bottom of the chart. And a lower hemisphere chart, the advantage of it is we're plugged in more on the inside, potentially. The cues and clues for identity, the hooks, the anchors, the ways, the tubes, and the tunnels to these planets work on the interior. So the benefit of that is a greater degree of self-knowing. The difficulty with a lower hemisphere chart is sometimes less objectivity about oneself.
Yeah, it's interesting because Dina's chart with everything on the top, it's almost like living life in a fishbowl. Everyone can see, it's like living your life on the top of a bridge, where this is like living your life in a subway system. Now this isn't a reflection about whether one can have fame or fortune or happiness. It just says that you're probably a lot more complex and have a lot more stuff going on than people see when they look at you. And I think that becomes interesting because there's a Leo rising, so the first flash is that it may seem like you're very upfront and open with your stuff. You're looking puzzled, is that not correct?
Actually, it's 3:03 p.m.
Well, that will change things.
That'll
That'll
change
our whole
everything.
story.
All right.
Thank you for
Good.
noticing.
That's good.
I don't mind being wrong. I would much rather be meaningful. Let's see.
So we're going to forget it. Take everything we said about Ryan. Ryan is totally superficial, insincere. God knows when he was really born. He's just making this shit up.
But then again, so are we.
Yeah. Yeah, but we're professionals.
No, wait, we're not getting paid.
We're still professional.
Good.
All right. So we've now...
No, hold on. No, wait.
You have to just do
Yep.
redraw.
Yep.
Oh, very different story. Very different.
Okay, you know
story.
that stuff about living in the subway?
Yeah, forget about it. Yeah, totally different. Well, there's still one thing that is consistent with what Rick started and where I'd like
The
to take it
Capricorn
to.
moon? No.
Well, the ascendant or the rising sign, the sign coming up at the east of at the moment of birth, can be called one's persona, one's mask. It's not who we are, but how we appear. And with the incorrect time, it was Leo, fiery Leo rising. This is fiery Sagittarius rising. And both of those have in common the notion of wanting to present things in an upbeat kind of way and showing enthusiasm. And not to say you don't have enthusiasm, but you're one hell of a serious guy.
Yeah, more
You
practical.
are productive, practical, serious guy. Because the sun of will and consciousness is in practical earthy Virgo, the moon of emotion and feeling is in practical earthy Capricorn. You even have Mars, the planet of action, in no-nonsense Scorpio. So again, you can be the kind of person who looks more available than he really is.
And Saturn, the serious planet, lined up with Pluto, which even intensifies that even more. I mean, there's intense, powerful energy that I think that exactly opposite how I started when we had the wrong chart. It's almost like you make things look easier, and it's not like you're not accessible. But there's this whole thing about looking like you're so accessible. It's like the magician doing this when the real shit's going on down here. And so there's this whole thing about the outgoing and the Sagittarius rising and all these planets on display, but that Capricorn moon, Sirius, the Mars and Scorpio, Sirius, the Saturn Pluto, and the Virgo, Virgo sun. There's a lot of practicality. There's a lot of ambition. There's a lot of, like, even when you're relaxing and chilling, there's still something going on that's about where am I going to go, what am I going to do, the planning, and maybe even control.
Yeah, but what's
Bless you.
interesting, Uranus, the planet of freedom, is in a right angle to your sun of identity. So even though you've got all this hard-working stuff in your chart, once you've resolved the problem, you're no longer interested. Let's go on to the next thing. So I don't think you're somebody who has to find the one thing that he's good at, master it, study, work at it, and stay with it. Once you've gotten it, then I think Uranus, the planet of freedom, kicks in, and you go, what's new?
And
What's
Venus,
next?
And Venus is square Mars. It's also
Right.
agitating. It's the liking of the sparring, the wrestling, playing, whatever. That's not just about going along with the flow. It's more about the fun of engagement. On several levels, I think. Certainly the Uranus sun does that too. It's like needs to stir things up, needs to be the rebel. I knew someone who had Uranus square the sun like you do, who told me that they would read a book. They were an avid reader, but if it was assigned in a class in college, they were a college student at the time, that when the book was assigned that lost interest, they would put the book down. There's that contrariness of the...
Well, and the capacity, right, to take that contrarian attitude and take things that are really inventive and work hard enough at them to make them real. I mean, that combination of earthy productivity and pragmatism with the Uranian inventiveness and Sagittarius ascendant is very good for doing cutting-edge stuff.
And like Dina, yet differently, we have major Saturn transit issues going on, with Saturn having just come around to complete its first return. It takes Saturn about 29 and a half years to go around once, and Saturn has completed that, but it's still messing with your Pluto and even, I have moon aspects undone here because we were doing the transits before. And also squaring your moon, I'm going to add that back in there,
Yeah, I would encourage you to be nicer to yourself.
and to people.
No, to yourself. No, the reason I say that is the moon in Capricorn, the moon's emotion and feeling, and a Capricorn moon usually wasn't treated so tenderly or responded to with emotional sensitivity as a child. What that leaves someone with is a greater degree of responsibility and maturity on the upside, but a difficulty being vulnerable. Vulnerability, interestingly, it's particularly difficult for men, but in this chart I think it's quite difficult, but it's actually good for you. When you can actually tell someone that you need something, which is hard, because I don't know that you trust that anybody's going to do what you can't do for yourself. That is, however, a powerful yet challenging step toward intimacy.
I agree, and I think that this Saturn transit, I mean, there's been a lot of change, and the Saturn not only returning to where it was, but squaring the moon, and Saturn natally squaring the moon, I think that doubles what you were saying before about being hard on yourself, about you don't need anyone to ever tell you what's wrong, or that you didn't do something right. Even though you may have had that as a kid, there may be issues around that, about am I good enough, am I smart enough, am I tall enough, am I fast enough, whatever your issues are. But I think that it's like, before anyone says, you don't need that kind of negative feedback. And in a way, part of this process of maturation is learning that you don't have to associate with people who feedback that part of you that you already know about.
That's
You
right.
don't need to hear that
Right.
crap from others.
Except us, of course.
Yeah, except for us. 'Cause
And-
we think you're full of crap.
And if you've hit a wall professionally, move on. It's a good time. You might have, and trying to hold on to squeeze the last bit of value in return out of a profession or career direction, it might be time, if you're not already considering doing something else.
And we have Pluto trining the sun also, total deep. I mean, if you look back 3 or 4 years in your life, and I know some of this may be just about age, but your age, but if you look back 2 or 3 years and look ahead a year or two, there's this gradual metamorphosis that you're in the process of becoming something like a butterfly doesn't seem to have a connection with a caterpillar. It's like you're in this process of transmutation, transformation that isn't quite complete yet, or maybe it's nearly complete, but you haven't quite stretched your wings or broken out of the cocoon yet.
Or done the calculation of what it'll cost to get through, because that's Saturn, Pluto.
Yeah.
But you'll get it within the next couple of months, I think. Okay?
Welcome to Seattle.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, we've got one more we can take a look at.
Nancy.
Nancy?
Nancy.
Hi, Nancy. We do
Nancy.
Nancy every month. She's.
No, you don't. I come every month and try, though.
All right. Well, congratulations.
Well,
I hope.
today's your lucky day.
Maybe, we'll see.
Aries rising, Sun in Sag. We got this fire thing going.
We
but
have a
again,
lot of fire.
And another Capricorn moon. This is like an upbeat, I'll do it person in drag, in a serious costume.
And who's,
basically-
again, who's so demanding of yourself, that's moon in Capricorn. This is mother of the world. The moon is mother. When the moon is at the top of the chart, we tend to feel emotionally responsible for everything, and especially with the moon in Capricorn. And you have a Venus, planet of love, conjoined with Saturn, which said, if I didn't bleed, then I haven't earned it. So,
in Scorpio, yeah.
Right, in Scorpio. You can be pretty darn tough on yourself, I think.
And Pluto opposing Mars, I mean, pretty damn closely. And earlier we talked about Jupiter squaring Neptune, about that whole false prophet and the optimistic, the following the rainbow, the next great idea that isn't really. I mean, you have Jupiter. Your chart has a huge amount of invention, and I don't mean like Bach. I mean the sense of wanting to do something new and different, and the kind of awakeningness. And yet it seems like sometimes when you go through that process, you feel like you've misleaded yourself, and then you need to get back on track. You need to get to the jugular. You need to get, I mean, this chart in relationships is pretty intense, very intense. It's like whoever will. It's like as a child, perhaps, you know, people who became your friends, they either liked you a lot or you scared the hell out of them. You know, because even though you seem Aries, Sagittarius, fun-loving, and ready to go to do whatever, like Jeff said, there's a whole lot more seriousness, I think, that sits behind all that.
Yeah, I think an interesting thing in your chart is how to constructively use negativity. And the reason I say that is you have Mercury, the planet of intellect or perception, in Scorpio, which is acutely aware of what could go wrong or how much things cost. And you have Venus of evaluation and love, and Saturn in Scorpio, and Capricorn has a kind of a skeptical side too, yet you're a Sagittarius, which means the purpose of life is to exceed the boundaries, to go beyond the limits of that which you face. So the constructive use of negativity is acknowledging the calculation of what things will cost in money, time, energy, and relationships. Make that calculation, but not let it hold you back. If the process starts, if it stops at, no, this is going to be too much, then I don't think you fulfill your potential. If it is, let me consider worst case scenario. What does this cost? What if it goes wrong? Blah, blah, blah. I think if you can own that fully, then you can figure out a way to get there and to go further than you think you could. This is a good loaves and fishes thing. This is a good chart of somebody who can take a bankruptcy and get rich afterward, or get something big out of a potentially squeezing and limiting situation.
When it comes to timing, we have this Uranus-Pluto square that we talked about earlier, that we will be talking about for the next months and years. Pluto is in Capricorn coming towards your moon, and Uranus is lining up with your ascendant coming to square your moon. And so you're one of those, and I'm with you on this. My chart is not similar, but has similar degree stuff. And that is what Jeff said earlier about if you don't have it internally, you're not going to notice it externally. Well, we both have it internally. This shit's going to affect us. You know, we are, you and me, and probably many others, but are wired to these bigger changes that we're going to need to process the stuff ourselves. These are big changes that have to do with how you relate to, how you nurture others, how you let others care for you. I think that when it comes to intimate relationships, you unwrap very cautiously. And so there's this whole thing of trust and who you're going to trust. And I think that some of this stuff you may go through transitions as to how you're going to open up, or to people who are already close to you, but you still keep some distance in one way or another.
Yeah, and I think as well with current and upcoming cycles for the next year or so, let the boldest thoughts arise. That if you're going to struggle, you might as well struggle for something great. If you just aim to get by, then the struggle will probably not pay off, or it will last longer. And yet, if you're willing to struggle for something that's exciting, brilliant, out of the box, fresh and new for you, your chances of success are, I think, greater. In other words, we look at charts, and just as I said, this is an active month, I look at individual charts and go, how active is the year? And if it's a highly activated year, it's worth being bolder, and you are certainly in a more highly active time. So the more cautious, preserving sides, not that they should be totally ignored, but should speak more softly than the bolder sides. Okay? Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you,
Nancy.
SoulFood. Thank you, folks. See you next
here.
month.
Yeah, assuming that the planets don't run off their tracks.
Oh, yeah.
We'll see you
Yeah,
here.
we're going to be meeting at QFC
Actually, next month, the jury is out on next month because Wednesday night falls on a July 4th. And we don't know whether or not yet what's going to happen here, or whether or not we'll do it on the 4th or some other date. So stay attuned online. It's the first time in several years that this has happened. We don't know what the deal is yet. Thank you.
Hey. Thank you, Craig.
you can.
in, and then
Yeah,
I was
yeah, yeah,
out,
and then I was
you
out
were
of town.
Yeah, so.